The laws of logic represent humanity's most profound intellectual achievement, the articulation of reality's own structure into principles of thought. When Aristotle formalized these laws, he performed an act of recognition rather than invention. Human consciousness had operated according to these principles from its inception. What Aristotle accomplished was rendering explicit what had remained implicit in every act of cognition. The law of identity states that whatever exists possesses a determinate nature. Each entity is precisely what it is, maintaining its self-sameness across contexts. This law establishes the precondition for all predication, reference, and definition. Without stable identity, linguistic meaning evaporates and conceptual thought becomes impossible. The law of non-contradiction states that no entity can simultaneously possess and lack the same property in the same respect at the same time. Affirmation and negation exclude one another absolutely. To assert that a tree exists while simultaneously denying its existence in the same sense is not to make a paradoxical claim, but to make no claim whatsoever. The law of the excluded middle states that every proposition admits a binary valuation. It is either true or its negation is true, with no intermediate state. This principle undergirds all judgment, proof, and rational deliberation by establishing that reality presents itself determinately rather than indeterminately. These laws function through the fundamental reality of identity and difference. Reality is not a shapeless flux, but a structured manifold of distinct entities. A tree is not a star, an electron is not a galaxy, a thought is not a stone. It is precisely this differentiation, this irreducible uniqueness of each being, that underwrites the possibility of identity, the impossibility of contradiction, and the determinacy of truth. Without identity and difference embedded as a fundamental structure of reality, there would be no A distinct from not A, no basis for judgment, definition, or coherent discourse. The laws of logic do not impose order upon reality. They articulate the order that is already present in the very fabric of existence itself. We could just say that these laws function through the fundamental reality of identity because difference is really a derivative of identity. Though human intelligence was required to formulate these laws in propositional form, the laws themselves transcend human construction. They represent the codification of reality's own structural principles. Were reality not already organized according to identity and difference, no mind could recognize or apply logical principles. Logic does not impose order upon an otherwise chaotic cosmos. Rather, it articulates the order inherent in existence itself. The laws of logic, as fundamental attributes of reality, not formal premises, are ontologically prior to cognition. They constitute the conditions that make cognition possible. When we formulated these laws, we performed a remarkable transformation. We converted the implicit structure of the universe into explicit rules for understanding. We identified principles so fundamental, identity maintaining itself, contradictions being impossible, that they serve as instruments for discovering further truths about reality. Their authority derives from the most basic ontological fact. Entities possess determinate natures that distinguish them from what they're not. This is why logic possesses genuine universality. applying wherever anything exists. The practical verification of these laws appears in every successful human endeavor. Engineering succeeds because the physical world behaves determinately. A bridge either bears a load or fails to bear it. It cannot do both in the same respect. The impossibility lies in reality, not merely in thought. Medicine advances because compounds have determinate properties that cannot simultaneously produce and not produce specific effects. Agriculture works because seeds of wheat yield wheat, not corn. Identity is maintained across generations. Legal systems function because an action either occurred or did not occur. There is no middle ground that would make justice impossible. Every practical discipline confirms what philosophy demonstrates. These laws describe reality at its most basic level of being, which is precisely why respecting them leads to success while violating them leads to failure. The laws express reality's own architecture. They carry epistemic authority precisely because they reflect how the universe actually operates. They reflect how the universe actually is. Far from being arbitrary conventions of reason, they function as reliable guides because they are grounded in the way things are. These laws constitute our most certain knowledge. To deny them is not merely to be mistaken, but to demolish the very framework within which error and truth can be distinguished. They are true by the impossibility of their contrary. Any attempt to negate them necessarily presupposes them. Consider the structure of denial itself. To assert the law of non-contradiction is false requires distinguishing this assertion from its negation, thereby invoking the very principle being denied. The proposition collapses into incoherence at the moment of its utterance. These laws admit no exterior within the domain of intelligent thought. They govern all coherent cognition, assertion, and reasoning. To speak of a realm outside logic appears incoherent, for any attempt to conceptualize such an outside already invokes the logical distinctions it would transcend. The very concept of outside presupposes differentiation and exclusion. Yet we must be precise. This does not imply that reality itself depends upon logic as human discovery or formulation. The universe exists with ontological independence. It is not subordinate to our recognition of logical principles. Rather, the opposite holds. The universe's own structure, the fact that entities possess determinate natures, that contradictions do not obtain in reality, that things either are or are not, is what makes these laws possible and discoverable in the first place. The laws of logic are not mental impositions upon reality, but articulations of reality's inherent order. They describe the fundamental features through which reality becomes intelligible to any mind capable of recognizing it. Logic, therefore, marks the horizon of what can be known, but the cosmos itself possesses ontological priority. It exists prior to all cognition, constituted by the very principles that our minds discovered and named as the laws of logic. Despite 2 millennia of philosophical investigation, I believe we have barely begun to comprehend the full epistemological authority and value these laws possess. Thinkers across centuries have attempted to transcend them through narrative reframing, rhetorical sophistication, or dialectical paradox. Every such attempt has collapsed back into the structure it sought to escape, confirming rather than refuting logic's dominion. Throughout intellectual history, ambitious theoretical systems have constructed elaborate edifices of thought. When these systems fail to honor logic's certainty at their foundations, they build upon unstable ground. Once fundamental laws are violated, once contradictions are admitted, our identities rendered fluid, every subsequent claim inherits this instability. The corruption propagates through the system because the very conditions that make coherent assertion possible have been corrupted, compromised. Many philosophical constructions generate false conclusions not through faulty reasoning applied to sound premises, but through unsound premises that fail to respect logic's authority. A system built on logical contradiction resembles a structure built on quicksand. No amount of architectural ingenuity can compensate for the foundation's inability to bear weight. Consider any theoretical framework that claims reality is ultimately contradictory, or all distinctions are conventional illusions. To defend such claims, the system must distinguish between true and false interpretations, between its own position and rival positions, between reality and appearance. The structure undermines itself before examination can properly begin. What makes logic's refutation of such systems instantaneous is not arbitrary dismissal, but structural necessity. These systems fail the moment they are articulated because they must employ the very laws they deny in order to deny them. To claim that contradictions can be true is to assert a proposition that must itself be either true or false, the law of excluded middle, must maintain stable meaning throughout the assertion, the law of identity, and cannot simultaneously be both true and false, the law of non-contradiction. The denial uses what it denies. The rebellion confirms the authority it seeks to overthrow. This is why no lengthy empirical investigation or complex analytical argument is required. The refutation is not a matter of marshalling evidence or constructing counter-arguments. It is immediate because the contradiction is performative. The system refutes itself in the act of formulation. Anything that contradicts these laws is necessarily false, not because we have proven it false through some external standard, but because it violates the very conditions that make assertion, proof, and falsity possible. Having established logic's foundational certainty, we must address a common confusion regarding formal logical systems and their relationship to these fundamental laws. Various formal logical systems, paraconsistent, modal, intuitionistic, fuzzy, and others, do not supersede the fundamental laws of logic. On the contrary, they presuppose them at every level. These specialized systems constitute logics only in a derivative sense. They operate by borrowing authority from the principles they appear to modify. No formal system can sustain a single inference apart from these foundational laws. So-called alternative logics depend upon these laws, upon this logic, to perform their logical work. Every formalism relies upon identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle to establish its terms, articulate its rules, and derive its conclusions. Consider modal logic's treatment of necessity and possibility. When a modal logician states, "It is possible that P," this very statement obeys the law of identity. The proposition P maintains stable reference rather than shifting meaning mid-inference. It obeys non-contradiction. The statement cannot simultaneously affirm and deny that P is possible. The formalism depends entirely on the foundational laws while exploring specific domains like necessity, possibility, and contingency. Even when modal logic examines what could be otherwise, its symbols, syntax, and inference rules must be what they are and not something else. This crucial distinction is frequently obscured in contemporary discourse. Formal systems are mistaken for replacements of fundamental logic rather than recognized as specialized applications that presuppose it. To construct any alternative logic is already to invoke logic's jurisdiction. For the alternative must be identified as distinct from classical logic, from the laws of logic, from identity. It must not be simultaneously identical and non-identical with classical logic, the law of non-contradiction. And it must either constitute a genuine alternative or not, the law of excluded middle. The authority of logic extends beyond epistemology into ontology itself. Its laws carry normative force precisely because they reflect reality's irreducible constitutional structure. The laws of logic possess authority because they reflect the universe's actual constitution. The structure of rational thought aligns with reality, not because the mind imposes categories upon an amorphous flux, but because correct reasoning corresponds to the fundamental features by which reality itself is constituted. This is not metaphorical language. When we speak of logic reflecting reality's grammar, we are describing ontological fact, not linguistic convenience. Reality is fundamentally constituted according to principles of identity and differentiation. A hydrogen atom is precisely what it is, not a carbon atom. A star is what it is, and not a tree. These distinctions are not conceptual impositions by minds seeking order, but objective features of the universe's constitution. Rational thought succeeds as a method of understanding precisely because the world conforms to intelligible patterns, allowing coherent reasoning to track reality effectively. Language and thought depend absolutely upon logical structure. Every proposition presupposes these laws to generate meaning. Syntax and semantics disintegrate without identity and non-contradiction. Even sophisticated attempts at linguistic relativism or narrative transcendence of logic fail because language itself constitutes a logical system. Words require stable reference to mean anything, the law of identity. Sentences cannot simultaneously affirm and deny the same content, the law of non-contradiction. And propositions must bear determinate values, the law of excluded middle, for communication to occur. Some might object that certain domains, subjective experience, consciousness, qualia, aesthetic or mystical insight, lies beyond logic's reach. This objection fails upon examination. To articulate any such domain requires logic. To claim my subjective experience is ineffable is to identify that experience as distinct from other experiences, the law of identity. To assert that it is ineffable rather than effable, non-contradiction, and to make a claim that it is either true or false, the law of excluded middle. Even to say logic cannot capture this is to employ logic in making the claim. The supposed transcendence of logic turns out to presuppose it. What may lie beyond logic's complete description does not lie beyond logic's jurisdiction, for the very act of designating something as beyond description is itself a logical operation. Logic's reach extends beyond theoretical knowledge into the practical domain of human action and judgment. Without logical structure, moral reasoning becomes impossible. Deliberation, ethical judgment, and meaningful choice all presuppose the laws of logic. Indeed, without these laws, the very concept of morality loses coherence. To speak meaningfully of good and evil, right and wrong, virtue and vice necessarily invokes distinction, exclusion and identity, the fundamental logical operations. Consider a concrete case. If someone claimed that theft was good, in some mystical sense transcending rational analysis, genuine moral debate could not proceed. For the conversation to have content, both parties must agree that theft either is or is not good, that the act under discussion is theft rather than something else, and that their moral position cannot simultaneously affirm and deny the same proposition. Without these logical foundations, the term good, theft, and debate cease to possess determinate meaning. The exchange dissolves into mere vocalization. The notion that morality constitutes a form of mysticism independent of logical structure is therefore incoherent. Every moral judgment, even every moral intuition, presupposes our capacity to distinguish one action from another, one consequence from another, one principle from its opposite. Claims that ethics operates in some realm beyond logic are self-refuting, for they must employ logical distinctions to articulate the supposed transcendence of logic. The question of what these laws are, their mode of being, naturally arises from our investigation. While extended metaphysical speculation often generates more obscurity than insight, one point merits emphasis. If anything deserves to be called metaphysical, it is these laws. They possess greater claim to metaphysical status than virtually any other candidate, second only to the existence of the universe itself, which these laws render knowable. The laws exist independently of human recognition. The reality that instantiates them, the fact that entities possess determinate natures and exclude their opposites, obtains whether or not any mind apprehends it. Yet these laws become active within the domain of knowledge only through consciousness. Mind does not generate them, but serves as the medium through which they are recognized and formulated explicitly. Human intelligence did not invent logic. It discovered it, translating implicit structure into explicit principle. Because reality differentiates entities, trees are not stars, human cognition had always conformed to logical principles long before Aristotle's formalizations. Pre-philosophical thought operated logically, even without theoretical awareness of logic structure. Having established logic's narrative function, its capacity to refute error, we must now examine its positive dimension, its power to generate knowledge and understanding. The laws of logic function not merely as constraints that eliminate error, but as generative principles that make knowledge possible. They constitute positive powers rather than negative prohibitions. Logic both negates falsehood and constructs truth. Every scientific discovery, every mathematical proof, every philosophical insight, every moment of genuine understanding manifests logical order in action. These laws do not simply guard us against contradiction. They actively enable comprehension, enable problem solving, and illuminate reality's structure. This generative capacity represents humanity's firmest ground for hope. Through these laws, we can understand the world systematically, correct our errors reliably, and progressively free ourselves from ignorance. They are not chains constraining inquiry, but the light by which inquiry sees. They enable the living articulation of reality's structure, unavoidable, inescapable, and inexhaustibly fruitful. Every valid inference unfolds the order these laws contain. Every coherent system of thought, scientific theories, mathematical structures, ethical frameworks, technological innovations depends upon the operation of these laws. These laws do not limit what we can know. They make knowing possible. The laws of logic possess no equivalence. While we can know many things with confidence, nothing else shares their epistemic status. Every other item of knowledge depends upon them. They in turn depend upon nothing beyond reality's own constitutional nature. They are not objects within reality that we could locate empirically, like planets are particles. Rather, their existence flows from the nature of reality itself, from the fact that the universe is differentiated and self-consistent. Once recognized and articulated, this basic nature of identity entered the realm of thought as a usable principle. Human intelligence transformed what was implicit in existence into an instrument for expanding understanding. The laws of logic thus occupy a unique position, rooted in the fabric of reality while simultaneously operating within the structure of reason. This dual character explains their generative power. They constitute the generative grammar of all rational inquiry, the seed of intelligibility itself. We rarely pause to recognize the profound authority of the laws of logic. They are so intimately woven into every act of thought, so constantly present in every moment of awareness, that their power becomes nearly invisible, like the atmosphere that sustains us without our conscious attention. Yet in recognizing their authority, we simultaneously recognize something extraordinary about the universe. We inhabit a reality in which truth is possible. Knowledge is neither illusion nor accident, because reality is not formless chaos, but a domain of identity and difference. Entities are themselves, and not their opposites. A tree is not a star, and this unwavering fact of distinction makes all comprehension possible. Logic is not human artifice, nor merely a useful analytical tool. It is coherence itself, the most basic constitution of what exists. When human intelligence articulated the laws of logic, it did not impose order upon disorder. It gave voice to the identity that was already there. We transformed reality's implicit structure into explicit principles for understanding. Everything we know, every discovery we make, every coherent proposition we formulate stands upon this foundation. Science presupposes it. Mathematics unfolds from it. Ethics and perception itself are possible only because of it. The laws of logic are not one truth among many. They are the precondition for all truth. They do not merely govern thought. They generate the domain wherein thought and reality converge. Their authority is absolute, not by decree, but by necessity. There exists no exterior to these laws, no beyond to which one might appeal, no higher tribunal of judgment. The laws of logic constitute the bedrock of thought and reality alike, the luminous framework within which all things appear and all knowledge becomes possible. They represent humanity's most reliable ground for hope, the foundation upon which we construct understanding, correct error, and illuminate what is real. To recognize this is to see that logic is not arid abstraction, but the radiant core of intelligibility. Reality's pulse translated into thought, the convergence point of being, knowledge, and truth.